Advisory. Some episodes of the 1836 podcast are not intended for all audiences, due to details that might be considered disturbing. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
On this episode of the 1836 Arkansas Roots and Branches podcast, we branch out and share the violent history of Bull Creek. The rugged hills of the Ozarks, where the landscape was as wild as the hearts of its settlers, a feud was born along Bull Creek that would echo for years. Bull Creek wanders through the Ozarks, crossing Christian and Taney Counties in southern Missouri. Its path takes it southwestward until it merges with the White River, ultimately emptying into the modern Lake Taneycomo. In the 1870s, the Payton family moved from north-central Arkansas, originally from Tennessee, and settled near Bull Creek. James Payton, a man of ambition, envisioned acres of farmland teeming with livestock, a testament to his family's hard work and resilience. Yet, this dream was not without its adversaries. The Matthews family, with their own stakes in the region, viewed the arrival of the Paytons with suspicion and growing animosity. The initial years were marked by a tense coexistence, where livestock grazed freely on what was known as open range, but the land was not vast enough for two ambitious families to share without friction. By the mid-1880s, small disputes over grazing rights began to simmer.
Their feud truly ignited in March of 1885. Under the cover of night, an explosive device was hurled into the cabin of Alexander Payton, the son of James. The blast tore through the quietness of the Ozarks, leaving the Payton family with injuries that would never fully heal, both physically and emotionally. The explosion severely injured Alexander, left his wife partially deaf, and harmed their young grandson Johnny Payton. This act of violence transformed the simmering tensions into an inferno of revenge. Believing Lemuel Matthews was responsible for the attack, the Paytons sought revenge, with their neighbor Robert Alexander Meadows supporting their suspicion. Feeling threatened and fearing retaliation, Lemuel Matthews and his wife packed their belongings and headed northeast to the relatively newer railroad town of Chadwick, hoping for a fresh start. However, on April 12, 1885, as the Matthews family traveled through the remote area between Bull Creek and Chadwick, they were ambushed by gunfire from the surrounding woods. Lemuel was struck, and their 18-month-old son, Claudie Matthews, was tragically killed. Lemuel's wife, Minnie Dye, and her sister, who were also in the wagon, escaped injury. Lemuel recognized the attackers: James Payton, age 14, and his brother William Payton, age 16, both sons of Alexander Payton. The next day, a Christian County posse found the two boys hiding in a smokehouse at their damaged cabin. Authorities believe that young James Payton was the one who fired the fatal shot that killed Claudie Matthews. The legal aftermath was swift, and the Payton brothers were arrested. In 1886, a jury in Christian County found the now 15-year-old James guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced him to hang on January 14, 1887.
With the influence of the Bald Knobbers, James Payton's attorney was exerting efforts to prevent his client from facing execution. At the same time, the injured farmer, Lemuel Matthews, was consumed with anger and was convinced that Robert Meadows had instigated the young Payton brothers to commit the act that murdered his son. It was widely known that Meadows supported the Paytons in their conflict with Matthews. On March 17, 1887, Missouri Governor John Marmaduke changed James Payton's death penalty to a life sentence, sparing him from the gallows. Barely a month later, Lemuel Matthews, consumed by grief and rage, took justice into his own hands. In June of 1887, as Robert Meadows and his wife Allie were traveling near Bull Creek and encountered Lemuel Matthews. In an act of revenge, Lemuel ambushed and shot Robert Meadows dead in front of Allie, an act he believed was necessary retribution for instigating the Payton boys. Despite his arrest, Matthews was acquitted, another verdict that highlighted the region's justice system, where personal vendettas often trumped legal accountability. Seeking peace away from Bull Creek, Lemuel Matthews moved as far away as possible, settling in California, where he eventually died in San Francisco in 1934. In 1892, the Payton family sold their Bull Creek land to Steve Bilyeu and returned to Newton County, Arkansas. James Payton received a pardon in 1895 and was released from prison just 10 years into his life sentence. He then attempted to forge a new path by relocating to Joplin, Missouri. The feud between the Paytons and the Matthews, marked by bombings, ambushes, and murders, served as a stark testament to the profound connection between land ownership and personal pride in the Ozarks. Though the Paytons and Matthews left Bull Creek, the Meadows and Bilyeu families remained in the area, and the hope for peace was short-lived.
A few years later, the simmering tensions between the Meadows and Bilyeu families, linked by history and marriage, erupted into a fatal conflict. It all started over a fence meant to mark property lines, but which instead became a barrier between them. John Meadows, whose father Robert had been killed in the Payton and Matthews feud, proposed to Steve Bilyeu that they share the work on a fence. Meadows would supply the rails and Bilyeu would keep it up. This arrangement, however, backfired, setting the stage for conflict. Come 1897, the fence was falling apart, mirroring the breakdown in their relationship. The situation exploded when Steve Bilyeu's son Pete humiliated John Meadows by making him crawl in public at gunpoint. A local resident warned Pete of the dire consequences, a warning that proved accurate. John Meadows, under legal advice, told Steve Bilyeu that he would only look after half of the fence and remove his rails from the rest. On November 28, 1898, John Meadows, with his family including his brother, brother-in-law, and father-in-law, both ironically Bilyeus, along with a friend, went to take down his rails. Steve Bilyeu, with his sons Pete and Jimmy armed, confronted them. Violence ensued when Steve aimed at John, missed, and John fired back with his Winchester, killing Steve instantly. In the chaos, Pete shot at John, but John shot him dead. Steve's wife attacked John with a knife, wounding him, while Jimmy, stopped by his mother, was ultimately shot and killed by John too.
Within minutes, 3 Bilyeus were dead. John later expressed mixed feelings. While he felt Steve and Pete deserved their fate, he regretted Jimmy's death. Afterwards, John Meadows and his group willingly turned themselves in to the sheriff. While the Bilyeus accused Meadows of starting the fight, the local papers reported differently. A mob driven by the widow's sorrow sought to lynch John Meadows, but were surprised to find the prisoners armed, which prevented the act. After legal proceedings lasting 2 years, John Meadows and his companions were acquitted. John moved, always keeping his Winchester close, and once grimly advised another neighbor on dealing with the Bilyeus by suggesting lethal force. In an attempt to end the feud, John Meadows and Hosea Bilyeu sold their land to Rachel Wilder, another figure associated with lawlessness which continued Bull Creek's cycle of conflict.
The violence in Bull Creek wasn't just about family fights. It was a tangled mess of sadness, rightness, and heartbreak. There was not only domestic violence, but also people taking justice into their own hands, which sometimes went wrong. One cold November day in 1888, Gravelly Hollow was rocked by a tragedy at the Pruitt home. William Pruitt, originally from Kentucky, found that his wife, America, had done something terrible. She had killed their daughters and then herself. This awful family event, set during a time of public feuds, showed how tough life on the frontier could be on families.
The Bald Knobbers, a group formed to bring order to the chaos, were led by Nat B. Kinney. They tried to enforce the law where it was weak, but their ways could be just as harsh as the lawlessness they fought. Their violent actions near Oldfield in 1887 made it clear how much the community wanted peace. But when Kinney was killed in 1888, it showed that even the enforcers weren't safe. In the Ozarks, justice often depended more on who had power than on what was fair. For example, Lemuel Matthews got off easy for killing Robert Meadows, and John Meadows faced little trouble after attacking the Bilyeus. Showing how the law wasn't always fair or consistent, revenge often ruled. The effects of these conflicts went far beyond just ending them. Bull Creek, always there, was like a silent witness to all these events. These stories are carved into the folklore of the Ozarks, telling how small conflicts could lead to deadly troubles, how justice could be as changeable as the weather, and how Bull Creek was part of these human tragedies.